So today we're doing scenes 4, 5, and 6. Hopefully we can get through them all. But at the end of scene 3, we know that Romeo went to meet with Friar Lawrence, and his goal was to try to get Friar Lawrence to agree to marry he and Juliet later that day. Friar Lawrence eventually says, fine, this is a bad idea, but fine, but only because I think it's going to end the family feuds. Okay, so scene 4, it just says a street. So we're just on the street somewhere. Benvolio and Mercutio come in, and they still don't know where Romeo is from the night before. So Mercutio says, where the devil should this Romeo be? Came he not home tonight? Benvolio says, not to his father's. I spoke with his man. Mercutio says, why, that same pale-hearted, hard-hearted wench, that Rosaline, torments him so that he will sure run mad. So at this point, they still believe that he's in love with Rosalind. They don't know about Juliet quite yet. Benvolio says, Tybalt, the kinsman to old Capulet, hath sent a letter to his father's house. Mercutio says, a challenge on my life. So Tybalt has cordially, officially challenged Romeo to a duel. Benvolio says, Romeo will answer it. Mercutio, any man that can write may answer a letter. Benvolio says, nay, he will answer the letter's master, how he dares being dared. Mercutio says, alas, poor Romeo, he is already dead, stabbed with a white wench's black eye, shot through the ear with a love song, the very pin of his heart cleft by the blind bow-boy's butt shaft. And is he a man to encounter Tybalt? So Mercutio says he can't fight because he's already dead because love killed him. And also, he's in no position to be fighting because he's probably going to lose. Benvolio says, why? What is Tybalt? Now, this is where Mercutio is going to kind of explain to us what Tybalt is like. He says, more than a prince of cats, I can tell you. Oh, he's the courageous captain of compliments. He fights as you sing prick song, keeps time, distance, and proportion. Rests me his minim rest, 1, 2, and the third in your bosom. The very butcher of silk button, a duelist, a gentleman of the very first house, of the first and second cause. Ah, the immortal passado, the punto reverso, the hay. Benvolio, the what? Mercutio, the pox of such antic, lisping, affecting fantasticos. These new tuners of accent. By Jesu, a very good blade, a very tall man, a very good whore. Why, is not this a lamentable thing, grandsire, that we should be thus afflicted with these strange flies, these fashion mongers, these perdona-me's, who stand so much on the new form that they cannot sit at ease on the old bench. Oh, their bones, their bones. Okay, so Mercutio spends a little bit of time explaining to us how good of a fighter Tybalt is. They call him the Prince of Cats. He's got 9 lives. He's very good. He's a duelist. But then he also kind of makes fun of him a little bit in this area. He says, he's got all these fancy moves, and, he's kind of like a dancer and all these different things. And that's going to continue a little bit. But then Romeo comes in, no longer moody, remember, because he's just overjoyed. Benvolio says, here comes Romeo, here comes Romeo. Mercutio, without his roe like a dried herring. O flesh, flesh, how art thou fishified? How art thou fishified? Now is he for the numbers that Petrarch flowed in. Laura to his lady was but a kitchen wench. Mary, she had a better love to berhyme her. Ditto a dowdy, Cleopatra a gypsy, Helen and Hero, Hildings and harlots, Thisbe a grey eye or so, but not to the purpose. Signor Romeo, bonjour. There's a French salutation to your French slop. You gave us the counterfeit fairly last night. These are all allusions. We have Cleopatra, we have Helen, that's Greek mythology, we have Thisbe, that's another, that's a myth also, but it's also a reference to a different Shakespeare play. So there's a lot of allusions in this section. And then Mercutio's like, where'd you go last night? Romeo says, good morrow to you both. What counterfeit did I give you? Mercutio, the slip, sir, the slip. Can you not conceive? Romeo says, pardon, good Mercutio. My business was great, and in such a case as mine, a man may strain courtesy. He's like, I'm very sorry that I, disappeared on you last night, but I had very important business to attend to. AKA, proposing to Juliet, kind of. And so then Mercutio says, that's as much to say, such a case as yours constrains a man to bow in the hams. Romeo, meaning to curtsy. Mercutio, thou hast most kindly hit it. Romeo, a most courteous exposition. Mercutio, nay, I am the very pink of courtesy. Romeo, pink for flower. Mercutio, right. Romeo, well, that is my pump well flowered. Okay, a lot of back and forth talking about a couple of, inappropriate things, whatever, but they're just kind of having a little bit of a witty banter going on right now, okay? Mercutio says, well said, follow me this jest now till that hast worn out thy pump, that when the single soul of it is worn, the jest may remain after the wearing solely singular. Romeo, oh, single-souled jest, solely singular for the singleness. Okay, Da, 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 da. Mercutio finally says, "Come between us, good Benvolio, my wits faint." He's like, "Okay, I'm done with this, witty conversation." Romeo, switch and spurs, or I'll cry a match." Mercutio, "Nay, if our wits run the wild goose chase, I am done. For thou hast more of the wild goose in one of thy wits than I am sure I have in my whole 5. Was I with you there for the goose? Romeo, thou wast never with me for anything when thou wast not there for the goose. Mercutio, I will bite thee by thy ear for that jest. Romeo, nay, good goose, bite not. Mercutio, thy wit is a very bitter sweeting, it is a most sharp sauce. Romeo, and is it not then well served into a sweet goose? Again, it just continues. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. We probably don't need to read that part. Okay, Mercutio, we're going to start right here. Nope. Right here. Mercutio says, "Why is it not this bitter now that groaning for love? Now art thou sociable? Now art thou Romeo? Now art thou what thou art, by art as well as by nature? For this drivelling love is like a great natural that runs lolling up and down to hide his bauble in a hole." So this whole conversation between Romeo and Mercutio, it's just kind of like going back and forth and back and forth. But that serves to show that Romeo he feels like himself again, and he's not mopey and he's not sad. He's back to his old witty self, and he's, being playful and a little bit more cheery. And so Mercutio's like, "What's the deal? What's the deal here?" Benvolio says, "Stop there, stop there. Mercutio, thou desirest me to stop in my tail against the hare. Benvolio, thou wouldst else have made thy tail large." Mercutio, "Oh, thou art deceived. I would have made it short, for I was come to the whole depth of my tail, and meant indeed to occupy the argument no longer." Now, the nurse and Peter come into the scene. Okay, he's carrying a large fan. The nurse has come to talk to Romeo, because remember, Juliet says, "I'll send for you," blah, 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 blah. Peter is the nurse's servant. And Mercutio and the nurse are very similar, remember. They like to kind of poke fun. They like to make jokes. And so Mercutio is going to have a little bit of fun with the nurse, and he's going to kind of poke fun at her. So Romeo says, "Here's goodly gear." Mercutio says, "A sail, a sail." Benvolio, two, a shirt and a smock." The nurse says, Peter, anon. Nurse, "My fan, Peter." Mercutio, "Good Peter, to hide her face, for her fan's the fairer of the two." So immediately, Mercutio says, "A sail, a sail," which is like calling her so big that she's a ship. So right here, if you look over here, it kind of explains the joke. So he's already making jokes about her before she even talks to him. And then when she asks for her fan, Mercutio says yes, because her fan is prettier than her face, so she wants to cover her face with the fan. Nurse says, "God ye good morrow, good gentleman." Mercutio says, "God ye good end, fair gentlewoman." "Is it good end?" "'Tis no less, I tell ye, for the body hand of the dial is now upon the prick of noon." "Out upon you! What a man are you?" "One, gentlewoman, that God hath made himself to mar." That was Romeo. Nurse says, "By my troth it is well said, for himself to mar, quoth I." "Gentlemen, can any of you tell me where I may find the young Romeo?" Romeo says, "I can tell you, but young Romeo will be older when you have found him than he was when you sought him. I am the youngest of that name, for fault of a worse." So she found Romeo. Nurse says, "You say well." Mercutio, "Yea, is the worst well? Very well took, in faith, wisely, wisely." Nurse, "If you be he, sir, I desire some confidence with you." She says, "I would like to speak with you." Benvolio says, "She will indict him to some supper." Mercutio, "Abad, abad, abad. So ho." Romeo, "What hast thou found?" Mercutio, "No hare, sir, unless a hare, sir, and a Lenten pie, that is something stale, and a whore ere it be spent. An old hare whore and an old hare whore is a very good meat in Lent, but a hare that is horrid is too much for a score, when it whores ere it be spent." Now, this whole thing over here kind of explains. A bawd is a woman who runs a house of prostitution, so he called her a bawd a few different times. And then the song is supposed to be insulting as well. And here's a pun, because a hare can either be a rabbit or it can be a prostitute. Okay, and whore, spelled like that, means old. So he's just not being very nice to this poor lady. Okay, so Mercutio says, "Romeo, will you come to your father's? We'll to dinner thither." Romeo says, "I will follow you." So then Mercutio says, "Farewell, ancient lady, farewell." He sings, "Lady, lady, lady." And then Mercutio and Benvolio leave. The nurse says, "Marry, farewell. I pray you, sir, what saucy merchant was this that so was full of his ropery?" It's like, who was that jerk that kept making fun of me? Romeo says, "A gentleman, nurse, that loves to hear himself talk, and will speak more in a minute than he will stand to in a month." Nurse says, and to speak anything against me, I'll take him down. And I were a lustier than he, and 20 such jacks. And if I cannot, I'll find those that shall. Scurvy knave, I am none of his flirt gills, I am none of his skeins mates. Turning to Peter, she says, and thou must stand by too, and suffer every knave to use me at his pleasure? She's like, why didn't you speak up for me, Peter? Peter says, I saw no man use you at his pleasure. If I had, my weapon should quickly have been out, I warrant you. I dare draw as soon as another man, if I see occasion in a good quarrel, and the law on my side. Nurse says, now afore God I am so vexed that every part about me quivers. Scurvy knave, pray you, sir, a word. And as I told you, my young lady bade me inquire you out. What she bid me say, I will keep to myself. But first, let me tell ye, if ye should lead her into a fool's paradise, as they say, it were a very gross kind of behavior, as they say, for the gentlewoman is young. And therefore, if you should deal double with her, truly it were an ill thing to be offered to any gentlewoman, and very weak dealing. So the nurse finally tells Romeo, Juliet has sent me to talk to you, but before I tell you what she wants me to say, I need to know that you are not going to double cross her. You are not playing her, because she's very lovely and she's young and she's nice and she's naive, and you need to know that I will kill you if you break her heart, basically. Romeo says, Nurse, commend me to thy lady and mistress. I protest unto thee. Nurse, good heart, and in faith I will tell her as much. Lord, she will be a joyful woman. So he says, I promise. I'm respecting her. I love her. I'm going to get married, whatever. She's like, good. Romeo says, well, what wilt thou tell her, nurse? Thou dost not mark me. Nurse, I will tell her, sir, that you do protest, which, as I take it, is a gentlemanlike offer. Romeo says, bid her devise some means to come to Shrift this afternoon, and there she shall at Friar Lawrence' cell be shrived and married. Here is for thy pains. So then Romeo tells her the plan. And he says, go tell Juliet to go to Shrift. And Shrift is confession. So the plan is she's going to be like, Dad, I'm going to go to the church. I'm going to go to confession. But actually, they're going to get married. Okay, so then here's for thy pains. He tries to offer her some, money. And she says, no, sir, truly, sir, not a penny. Romeo says, go to, I say you shall. Nurse, this afternoon, sir? Well, she shall be there. Romeo says, and stay, good nurse, behind the abbey wall. Within this hour my man shall be with thee, and bring thee cords made like a tackled stair, which to the high top-gallant of my joy must be my convoy in the secret night. Farewell. Be trusty, and I'll quit thy pains. Farewell. Commend me to thy mistress. Nurse says, now God in heaven bless thee. Hark you, sir. So the nurse is actually kind of stoked, because she knows how much Juliet loves Romeo, even though it's been 4 seconds. But she's like, oh, good. I'm glad he's being loyal, and I'm glad he actually really does want to marry her. Romeo says, what sayest thou, my dear nurse? Nurse, is your man's secret? Did you ne'er hear say, two may keep counsel, putting one away? Romeo says, I warned thee, my man's as true as steel. So, right here, two may keep counsel, putting one away. That's kind of like that saying, two can keep a secret if one of them is dead. He's like, can you trust this Friar Lawrence guy? Can we trust that he's not gonna whatever and like double cross us or whatever? And he says, my man's as true as steel. Like he's good. He's the realist. The nurse says, well, sir, my mistress is the sweetest lady. Lord, when 'twas a little prating thing. Oh, there is a nobleman in town, one Paris, that would fain lay knife aboard. But she, good soul, has a life to see a toad, a very toad as see him. I anger her sometimes and tell her that Paris is the properer man. But I'll warrant you, when I say so, she looks as pale as any cloud in the versal world. Doth not Rosemary and Romeo begin both with a letter? So here, the nurse is actually talking about Paris and is telling Romeo that there's this guy in town who wants to marry Juliet, but that Juliet sees him as a toad, like she's not interested, whatever. And then Romeo says, I, nurse, what of that, both with an R. Nurse says, ah, mocker, that's the dog's name. R is for the... No, I know it begins with some other letter. And she hath the prettiest... sententious of it, of you and Rosemary, that would do you good to hear. And that part is explained here on the side. The nurse tries to recall a clever saying that Juliet made up about Romeo and Rosemary the herb, but can't remember, so she's literally just prattling on about nothing, as usual. Romeo says, commend me to thy lady. The nurse says, aye, 1,000 times. Romeo leaves, and she says, Peter. Peter says, anon. The nurse says, Peter, take my fan and go before and apace. And that is the end of scene 4. So go ahead and summarize scene 4. Make sure you get all the important parts. It starts with Mercutio and Benvolio, and they're talking about how they haven't seen Romeo. Then Romeo shows up, and Romeo's in a good mood, and they're like, okay, that's weird. And then the nurse comes in, and they make that plan. So the most important part of scene 4 is that Juliet plans to go to shrift or confession that afternoon, and there at Friar Lawrence's cell will they get married. Okay, and that's pretty much it. Also include the part where Mercutio is not very nice to the nurse. Okay. 5 begins in the Capulets orchard, and it's just Juliet in the scene right now, and she's been waiting and waiting and waiting for the nurse to come back with news about what Romeo said about the whole marriage thing. So Juliet says, "The clock struck 9 when I did send thee, nurse. In half an hour she promised to return. Perchance she cannot meet him. That's not so. Oh, she is lame. Love's heralds should be thoughts which 10 times faster glide than the sun's beams. Driving back shadows over lowering hills, therefore do nimble pinioned doves draw love, and therefore hath the wind-swift Cupid wings. Now is the sun upon the highmost hill of this day's journey, and from 9 till 12 is 3 long hours. Yet she is not come. Had she affections and warm youthful blood, she would be as swift in motion as a ball. My words would bandy her to my sweet love, and his to me, but old folks may feign as they were dead. Unwieldy, slow, heavy, and pale as lead." So she's complaining because the nurse has taken so long. She says she's so old and slow. Then she comes in, and she says, "Oh God," she comes, "Oh honey nurse, what news? Hast thou met with him? Send thy man away." The nurse says, "Peter, stay at the gate." So Peter leaves. The Juliet says, "Now, good sweet nurse, O Lord, why lookest thou sad? Though news be sad, yet tell them merrily. If good, thou shamest the music of sweet news by playing it to me with so sour a face." She's like, "Oh, you look sad. Is that bad news?" The nurse says, "I am a-weary. Give me leave a while. Fie, how my bones ache. What jaunts have I had?" Juliet says, "I would thou hadst my bones, and I thy news. Nay, come, I pray thee, speak. Good nurse, good nurse, speak." So this whole time, the nurse is like, "Oh, I'm so tired. I can't talk to you right now because I need a break." So she's essentially just messing with Juliet, drawing out this answer so that Juliet stresses out. So the nurse says, "Jesu, what haste? Can you not stay a while? Do you not see that I am out of breath?" Juliet says, "How art thou out of breath when thou hast breath to say to me that thou art out of breath? The excuse that thou dost make in this delay is longer than the tale thou dost excuse. Is thy news good or bad? Answer to that. Say either, and I'll stay the circumstance. Let me be satisfied. Is it good or bad?" The nurse says, "Well, you have made a simple choice. You know not how to choose a man. Romeo, no, not he. Though his face be better than any man's, yet his leg excels all men's, and for a hand and a foot and a body, though they be not to be talked on, yet they are past compare. He is not the flower of courtesy. But I'll warrant him as gentle as a lamb. Go thy ways, wench. Serve God. What, have you dined at home?" So there she says, Romeo's hot and everything, but he's not that good of a dude. Like, he's not very courteous or polite. And then she says, "Oh yes, have you eaten supper?" So she's changing the subject to draw this conversation out. Juliet says, No, but all this did I know before. What say he of our marriage? What of that?" The nurse says, "Lord, how my head aches. What a head I have. It beats as if it would fall into 20 pieces. My back or the other side. Ah, my back, my back. Beshrew your heart for sending me about to catch my death with jouncing up and down." Juliet says, "In faith, I am sorry that thou art not well. Sweet, sweet, sweet nurse, tell me, what says my love?" "Your love says, like an honest gentleman, and a courteous, and a kind, and a handsome, and I warrant a virtuous. Where is your mother?" Juliet says, "Where is my mother? Why, she is within. Where should she be? How oddly thou repliest. Your love says, like an honest gentleman, where is your mother?" Nurse says, "Oh, God's lady dear, are you so hot? Marry, come up, I trow. Is this the poultice of my aching bones? Henceforward, do your messages yourself." Juliet says, "Here's such a coil. Come, what says Romeo?" The nurse says, "Have you got leave to go to shrift today?" Shrift is the same thing as confession. Make sure you understand that shrift is confession because that's going to pop up later throughout the story. Juliet says, "I have." So then the nurse says, finally she gets to the point. She says, "Then hie you hence to Friar Lawrence's cell. There stays a husband to make you a wife. Now comes the wanton blood up in your cheeks. They'll be in scarlet straight at any news. Hie you to church. I must another way to fetch a ladder, by the which your love must climb a bird's nest soon when it's dark. I am the drudge, and toil in your delight, but you shall bear the burden soon at night. Go, all to dinner, hie you hence." Juliet says, "Hie to high fortune, honest nurse, farewell." So 90% of that scene is just her, the nurse, dragging this whole conversation out. And finally, at the end, what you need to put on your summary sheets is that the nurse drags out the answer, and that finally she tells Juliet to go to confession so that she can get married. She messes with Juliet, but then she finally says, go to confession, and you will be married. And that's the end of scene 5. Scene 6 begins in Friar Lawrence's cell, and it's just Romeo and Friar Lawrence. And Friar Lawrence says, so smile the heavens upon this holy act, that after hours with sorrow chide us not, which means may heaven bless us, so this act, we won't regret it later, which, we kind of know what happens, so unfortunately his blessing doesn't necessarily work. But then Romeo says, amen, amen, but come what sorrow can, it cannot countervail the exchange of joy that one short minute gives me in her sight. Do thou but close our hands with holy words, then love devouring death do what he dare. It is enough, I may but call her mine. That's actually pretty cute. He says, yeah, that's great and everything, but as long as I can call her mine, let all the sorrow and bad things come at us because nothing else matters, okay? So Friar Lawrence then is going to give Romeo a little bit of a warning. He says, these violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die like fire and powder, which as they kiss consume. The sweetest honey is loathsome in his own deliciousness, and in the taste confounds the appetite. Therefore, love moderately. Long love doth so. Too swift arrives, as tardy as too slow. So if you read over here, he's saying you're very passionate, but it's dangerous because it's like gunpowder and fire, and it explodes, and it's like honey that's too sweet. So he says you have to chill a little bit. You can't just dive in head first and expect everything to be okay. You have to think about things, and you have to take it slowly. That's his warning to Romeo. Then Juliet comes in, and Friar Lawrence says, here comes the lady. Oh, so light of foot will ne'er wear out the everlasting flint. A lover may bestride the gossamer that idles in the wanton summer air, and yet not fall, so light is vanity. Juliet says, good even to my ghostly confessor. Friar Lawrence, Romeo shall thank thee, daughter, for us both. Juliet says, as much to him else is his thanks too much. Then Romeo says, so they're going to do a little love talk here. Romeo says, ah, Juliet, if the measure of thy joy be heaped like mine, and that thy skill be more to blazon it, then sweeten with thy breath this neighbor air, and let rich music's tongue unfold the imagined happiness that both receive in either by this dear encounter. Juliet says, conceit, more rich in matter than in words, brags of his substance, not of ornament. They are but beggars that can count their worth. But my true love is grown to such excess, I cannot sum up some of half my wealth. Okay, so then Friar Lawrence says, come with me, and we'll make short work. For by your leaves you shall not stay alone till Holy Church incorporate 2 in 1. And that is the end of Act 2. They are officially married. We don't actually get to see the wedding, per se, but by the time Act 3 begins, we know that they have already been married. So, Scene 6 is pretty simple. You just need to know that Friar Lawrence warns Romeo to, practice love moderately, and then Romeo and Juliet go ahead and get married. And that's it for Act 2.